We're about to talk about a brand new voice in fantasy fiction that feels like he's been doing it a long time. Hey there, Book Dragons. I'm so glad you're here with me today. I am really excited to talk about the amazing work of fantasy fiction that is the Edan Trilogy by Philip Chase. And we're going to jump right into this discussion, okay? If you're not familiar with Dr. Philip Chase, I'm not sure where you've been. He is an absolute gold standard on BookTube and the nicest guy and very astute without flaunting it. And he's just befriended so many on BookTube, myself included. And when I found out he had almost finished his series of fantasy novels, I was really excited to eventually check it out. And when it was released, I jumped right on it. Now, I don't have the first book, so I'm going to put a picture of The Way of Edan right up here so that you can see it. Now, I do have the second and third books, and those are The Prophet of Edan and Return to Edan. And guys, this is a really fascinating series of books. So I want to tell you a little bit about the story. I'm not going to go into too much detail because I want you to go into it fresh and be able to enjoy it. And if you see a little tail popping up here from time to time, that's because my wonderful cat Ari has decided to grace us with her presence today. So she's here with me. But I do want to give you some basic information about the series. I'm going to talk about some of the characters, the magic, and the themes. And then we'll wrap it all up at the end with a nice little bow, and I'll tell you what I thought of it overall, okay? And I'm kind of going off the cuff on this review because I want to talk about how the books made me feel. And they just left such an impression on me that I think I can do a pretty good job on this review without having anything really scripted. So this takes place in a unique fantasy world created by Philip Chase. It's definitely inspired by the ancient world, especially the Viking era or the Norse peoples, and I just really enjoyed how he kind of wove that into this story. And it follows a young man in a small village called the Mark. He's the son of one of the warrior chieftains in the village, and he goes on an expedition with the warriors of the village into the forest, and while he's told to stay behind, something distracts him and leads him off into a separate path of the forest where he encounters a being that will change his life forever. And I'm not going to say anything else but that because I don't want you to be spoiled. But that is the gist of the story. That's where it picks up. And the rest of this saga follows that character as he adapts to the destiny that has been set before him. There are several important characters in the story, the main character being Dayraven, who is the character that I mentioned. He is the one whose life is really upended and changed forever as a result of this encounter in the forest. And there are also other people that he comes into contact with, such as his good friend Imhar, who has kind of been his protector all his life growing up. He was a sworn servant of the household that Dayraven grew up in. And there are other characters he meets along the way, such as Norn, the Dwerg, and the Dwergs are kind of like dwarves in this story, and Orvandil, a displaced leader of what are essentially Vikings in this story, but they're great and powerful warriors. There's also Sakara, who is a soon-to-be queen, and the wizard Galdor, and a witch that Dayraven grew up knowing named Erd. There is a magic called the Gift in this story, and it's largely based on empathy, so a person with the gift has the ability to dive deep into the feelings and emotions of others and gain insights about them. And someone powerful enough in the gift can even change the emotions of others. The gift can also be channeled into a type of visual magic like fire and lightning and things like that called Almakti. There are various people throughout the story who have different levels of the gift. Sakara, of course, does have the gift, as well as Galdor. Dayraven has it as well. But Dayraven's encounter in the forest has subjected him to an unwanted symbiotic relationship of sorts that greatly enhances the gift inside him to dangerous levels. He can control it to a point and use it for good, but at some point, this entity within him is going to take over and use it for more destructive purposes. So now let's talk about the themes, because this is really, I think, where the book shines. And one of the themes in this series, in fact, one of the strongest themes in the series, is the theme of destiny or fate. And all of the characters in the story that are connected to Dayraven experience changes in their life that they did not expect or really want, but none more so than Dayraven. Everything that he knew, everything that he expected from his life was torn away from him by his encounter in the forest, and his destiny was completely altered as a result. And out of all the characters, I could find myself relating so much to Dayraven because growing up, I thought I knew exactly what direction I was going, what path I wanted to go on for my life. And life just took turns that I did not expect or want. And I look back on it now and I'm happy all that happened. But it was so painful and agonizing at times going through it. And I watched Dayraven progressing through this series of books and the utter destitution at times that he experienced, not having wanted anything that was thrust upon him. And that's kind of the way destiny or fate works, right? Sometimes it's just thrust upon you, whether you want it or not. And so I could really, really relate to Dayraven and sympathize with him and empathize with him, which I think was the point of the story. Of all the characters in the book, he was definitely probably the most compelling. The others were as well, but Dayraven especially was just such a compelling character for me, and one that I could really relate to. Another theme that is heavily explored in this book is fanaticism, and that you mostly experience through learning about the priests of Edan, who will go to whatever lengths they need to bring the kingdom of Edan to earth and subject all the people to the will of Edan. And so you encounter characters like the supreme priest Bledla, who is pretty much as fanatical as they come. Everything in his life has been devoted to the cause of Edan, or at least the cause of Edan as he sees it. And he has made an alliance with King Erkenwald, the king of Torland, to use the siege of war to subject all of the people of Ermenland to the will of Edan. And so fanaticism is really strong in this. The corruption of power is also really strong. We see this most strongly in King Erkenwald, who will do whatever he can to spread his earthly kingdom. So he will use the prophets of Edan for his own purposes, and once he is ruling over the entirety of Ermenland, he will discard the way if it suits his purposes. His driving force is his narcissistic greed for power, and everything else comes second to that. And there's also a sense of a war between the ideals of progression and fatalism. On the one hand, you've got Dayraven, who wants to make the world better. He wants to see people stop hurting. He wants to be the good person that he knows he can be down deep inside. But then there's this entity within him that is warring with his emotions and trying to take him over little by little to the point where it can enact its destruction of the human race, which it sees as the ultimate pest. And so if you can imagine having these two things warring inside you, you've got Dayraven over here who doesn't want people to suffer, and he wants people to know love and compassion and charity. And then there was this other thing over there that just wants to destroy everything. And little by little, he's becoming weaker and weaker, and this thing will eventually take him over. Every day is a struggle for him. And there comes a climactic point at the end of book 1 where he has no choice but to use the additional power that he is given to protect people, especially the people he loves, and it changes him. And then we see that change growing exponentially over the other 2 books in the series. And then, of course, there are the themes of the power of friendship and love. And I just really loved watching the relationships between Dayraven and his friends grow and prosper to the point that he knows that whatever choice he makes in the end, it's going to be a choice for the people he loves. And toward the end of the series, it ends up being the hardest choice he will ever have to make. And it will be the hardest choice for those closest to him as well. And he will have to answer the question, what has to be done for the greater good, for the true power of Edan to take hold in this world? And so I just thought it was a fantastic set of themes that were played out through this story. And there are other themes as well that I have not touched on, but I especially wanted to touch on those. So let's talk about pros and cons. I thought the character development was really, really well done. I thought the magic system was really well thought out and very unique. I've never really seen a magic system based in empathy before, so that was kind of different, and I really, really liked it because empathy can be a powerful force for good. And I think that was kind of one of the driving points of this as I was reading through it, to emphasize the power of empathy. I thought the different races in the world were well thought out as well. Some of the locations were really cool. And the religious system of the Way of Edan and the Priests of Edan, I thought was excellently done. One of the main antagonists of the story, the Supreme Priest Bledla, was just absolutely menacing and cringeworthy, and it was just so well done. And I was very impressed at some of the very bold choices that Philip Chase made at different points in the story that I did not see coming. And at times I was thinking, okay, now how is the story going to continue from here now that that's happened? And I have to say, he wrapped it up really well, despite those very bold choices that created some significant changes in the path of the story. So I just thought it was very well done. If there are any cons in the story, I have to say that there are times, mostly in The Prophet of Edan and Return to Edan, where the story kind of dragged. There were definitely some slow burns in the story, and I can see why they were there, but I think it did detract a little bit from the pacing. One other con for me was one particular character in the story, and I'm not going to say who, but at one point in the story, this particular character changed to a character that was very, very like the Jesus of Christianity. So much so that I was thinking, oh wow, that's very on the nose. It was a stark resemblance. Now that's not necessarily a bad thing, it was just a little bit too on the nose for me. But that's okay. I understand why he did it. I think it was probably an appropriate choice. It just took me out of the story a little bit. That's all. So, other than those two cons, everything else about this story was bloody fantastic. The first book especially, I thought was flawless. I thought it was absolutely perfectly executed. The other two books in the series are great as well. I definitely highly recommend you read the entire series. but I think The Way of Edan is still my favorite book in this series. He just really nailed that first book, and that is impressive. So I think it's time to talk about my rank for the series. And I'm going to put this in my hoard. It is definitely a series I'm happy that I own. It's definitely a series that I think at some point in the future I would read again. If you like classic fantasy with some new ways of doing things, I think you're really going to enjoy this series. So, Philip, bravo to you, sir. You've created a fantastic story, and I hope all of you will read it. Let me know in the comments below, have you read the Edan series by Philip Chase yet? Or if you've not finished it yet, where are you at in the series? And if you've not read it, but you've heard about it, are you going to pick up this series? I would love to talk with you in the comments below. Until next time, guys, make sure you read more books. I'll talk with you soon.